Hey guys, what is going on? It is Broken Nose Vlogs here. Now I know I said that I had some PC build videos that I was working on, and they should be released onto my channel relatively soon from the time of that video. And it turns out I was a little incorrect. Now, it's not entirely my fault. It's partially my fault. But let me kind of go back and preface before I talk to you guys about what happened. So, I was going to do sort of like a challenge on building a couple of really sort of like budget PCs using a limited amount of funds. The funds were going to come from the sales of some consoles, some handheld consoles, Nintendo Switches, and a modded PSP, which I did sell and I did buy some parts with. But originally the plan was to only use parts that I bought from that or stuff that I already had existing, which I did stick to. So there was two builds. There was an Intel and an AMD build, and they drove me up the wall. One slightly more than the other, and it will be the one that I talk about in this video. The AMD build drove me to the point of a near mental breakdown a little bit, because I will say I've been building computers since I was a teenager, and maybe even a little bit before that, but while I don't consider myself a master builder or something like that, I am competent. Like, I know what I'm doing. I can put things together and they will work. I will say that I am probably not great at cable management, but no, really, I'm bad at cable management. If there's one thing you can judge me on and tell me I'm bad at, it's cable management. But I can put things together and they will work. I've never ran into a situation where, like, I just couldn't get a system to work. But that's what I kind of ran into, just problem after problem after problem with this particular build. So the AMD build that we'll talk about today originally was going to be a Ryzen 5 1600, which was going to sit inside of a MSI B350 Tomahawk motherboard. It was going to have like 32 gigabytes of DDR4, 3200 RAM. I was going to use the NVIDIA GTX 1070, which was from a previous build, the budget PC build that was all pink. That was going to get repurposed, and it was going to sit inside of this neat case that I had found for a pretty good price. It was an NZXT H440, which was from an era where like 3.5-inch drives were still fairly common. So you had a lot of drive space. It's a fairly big case. It still has a transparent window to look through, but it's smaller than most of your like sort of fish tank cases these days, and it was made out of plastic instead of glass. So it's kind of like that stepping stone before we get to the more common all glass sort of high-end fish tank cases that we have today. That was the plan originally. That is not what I ended up with. So let me go ahead and I'll start at what kind of gave me problems. We'll start with the case, actually. So I purchased this case for like $20. It's a pretty cool case. It's red and black. For this H440, I found out there were a couple different color options. There was like white and purple, there was orange and black, there was black and red. It was pretty cool. You don't see color combinations like that anymore nowadays. So that alone I was kind of excited about seeing. I was like, oh, that's pretty neat. And it was in fairly good shape externally. At least it looked like it in the pictures. Well, I went and picked it up and took it home and got ready to clean it, which you should do with anything that you buy secondhand. And well, it was a little gross. The fan filter, for example, when you remove the front panel, was essentially just full of dirt and dander and hair, enough to where I swear a small dog could be created out of it. It was gross. I did a lot of cleaning on it, and I'll show some pictures as I'm talking about that here. The other issue that I had was some of the features that I was looking forward to, because I did a little bit of research on it, didn't work. There was a fan hub in the back that had sort of corroded into nothing, so I had to remove that. And then there was a lighting system. It was an LED lighting system. Now, it wasn't RGB, but it was plain white LED lighting that would have lit up the NZXT logo on the bottom, and I believe part of the motherboard from the side. So I was pretty excited about that. Well, those weren't included, or at least the cables weren't included for the lighting system. I still might play around with this because I have looked at some posts on my Facebook feed in one of the groups that I am in, and they have talked about replacing those LEDs, so that's still a viable possibility. It'll just have to be powered differently. And of course there were other issues like the fans that just did not spin anymore. They were pretty much non-usable, so those came out, and I replaced the three 120s in the front, and I also bought a brand new exhaust 140 for the back. Now this case also had some other cool features. You could add 3 fans on the top if you wanted to, and it also had sound dampening foam that was pre-installed in the system. Now in order to use the top fan spots, it looks like you have to remove the foam, which probably is going to be a little bit more difficult than it should be on a 10-plus-year-old case, so I decided not to. The next problem that I ran into was actually with the power supply. The power supply that I picked up, not a problem. Power supply worked great, but installing the power supply did not go that well. I had not really looked into how the power supply installs on the 440. I kind of just assumed that it was fairly straightforward, like cases of today. I was wrong. So this particular case actually uses a bracket that installs onto the power supply, and then you slide the power supply in and then use the bracket to hold it into the case. I did not have the bracket. This was my first sort of like, well, what do I do moment. I can replace fans and clean up a case, but if I don't have a bracket, I'm not quite sure what I should do. And in this situation, I searched around on eBay, and I'll actually post a image up here really quick if you are in the same boat as I was. But somebody actually 3D prints the power supply bracket for these NZXT cases. So for an extra $10, I was able to get a bracket, and I was able to mount the power supply inside of it. So my $20 NZXT case has now gone up to $30. Whatever, no biggie. I'll put the thing together and just kind of go with it, right? So I install it. You may see some footage of the first attempt of installation times elapse as we're talking. So I attempted to put everything together, got it all ready, and I went to go turn it on. Or at least I thought I was going to turn it on. It did not work. It turns out that the power button and the associated cable were just toast. It was really brittle. The power button itself actually had looked like been used so often that what was kind of like a smooth flat button had divoted down, and I was just like, oh man, that's I can't fix that. So my solution for that was get a new power button. Well, I couldn't find a replacement NZXT one, but on Amazon they do make just replacement power buttons that you can stick on your case. So I bought a power reset button that had the proper cabling, fed it through the hole of the old power button, and now I have a functioning case. I've got the motherboard and CPU and everything in there. It's ready to go. I can finally turn it on, so let's turn it on. And I get a diagnostic light, actually 2 diagnostic lights on the motherboard. I get bad CPU and bad RAM. And in my head, I'm like, well, the RAM can't be bad. The one thing that I did buy new for this system was the RAM and the storage. Or it was barely used storage that came from my, my personal stash. It was not bought secondhand used. So I knew the RAM was good. I knew I didn't know if the CPU was good. So I took the Ryzen 1600 out, and I put a spare AM4 processor, which was the Ryzen 5700X, which actually came from my personal build that I've done, the Blue PC, before I replaced that CPU with a 5700X 3D. Put the 5700X in there, powered it up. I no longer got a CPU diagnostic light, but I still got the RAM diagnostic light, and I still wasn't convinced that that was the problem. Also, now instead of just staying on with those diagnostic lights, you would turn the computer on, it would throw that diagnostic light, and then it would turn off. So there were a couple possibilities at this point. It could have been just the motherboard wasn't cooperating, or it could have been that the motherboard was bad. And I was kind of leaning towards the motherboard because, again, I've never ran into a situation where I've had DOA RAM. I've had RAM eventually fail on me, but I had never had a RAM that was purchased not function. So I broke the rule a little bit and I went out and I purchased a new motherboard. Now, this motherboard was not sourced using the money from the console sales, but I got an MSI B550 MPG Gaming Plus, which turns out is actually really similar to the motherboard that I have in my personal PC, which is an MSI B550 Pro A. I kind of dove down a rabbit hole, and literally somebody was like, yeah, they're literally the same motherboard, save the fact that the Gaming Plus has LED lighting on the motherboard, it has digital audio out, and it has a built-in I/O shield. Basically, everything else between the two, they look identical. And as a matter of fact, when it came to downloading the drivers for the Gaming Plus variant, the drivers that I had downloaded for my B550 Pro, they were the same exact drivers. So finally, that brings us to the final specifications of this build. I will throw them up on the screen here. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I can tell you at least what we have. So our CPU is now a Ryzen 7 5700X. The CPU cooler is a Thermalright Assassin X120 Refined SE, which is a 120mm tower CPU cooler. Our motherboard, as I said, is an MSI MPG B550 Gaming Plus, which is a pretty good motherboard. The RAM was some G-Skill Ripjaws 32GB DDR4 3200 RAM. Storage is kind of a mixed bag, so I have recently torn down my MSI laptop that was overheating. So the Kingston A2000 250GB M.2 that was in there became the boot drive for this new system. And then I had a couple of inland 2.5-inch. I had a 240 and a 256GB SSD. Those went in as well. Our video card was the Dell Alienware OEM GTX 1070. This was all put inside of an NZXT H440, and the power supply was a high power 600 watt power supply. It's a 80 plus gold certified power supply. I got that brand new. It is a pre-built power supply that came out of a CyberPower PC. But that was my final build. And the building of it, it was a little bit quicker the second time around than it was the first time. And I'll kind of show you a little time lapse really quick of me putting that together. And after I put it together, I hoped for the best and fired it up for the first time. And finally, we got a picture. We had no diagnostic debug lights. Everything worked as it should. Went right into the BIOS, started tweaking some stuff, and got everything set up. Now, because it's me, I did also decide to test this particular setup with a 1070 and a 5700X in 3D Mark. I don't feel like it's a super common or likely pairing because the 1070 is a little dated. As a matter of fact, I do believe it finally got its last set of drivers. The drivers that they released on July 31st for the GTX 10 and 9 series and anything prior is going to be the last set of drivers for those series of cards. NVIDIA has officially wound down and discontinued support for GTX 10 series and older, so you only have RTX 20 series and newer when it comes to support here on out. But the benchmarks actually weren't too bad. I will throw them up on the screen here really quick. And with that being said, finally, this PC had been built and was functioning as it should. There were some modifications made to the case to make sure it functioned properly, such as the external power button and things like that. But I finally had a pretty decent working PC. I was okay with the benchmarks because I know this PC is probably not going to be doing a whole lot outside of its intended purpose of Stepmania and maybe streaming Stepmania. I do not know how I lucked out so badly on this build and the other build that we'll talk about in another video when it comes to just parts not functioning. I mean, personally, when I sell something, I don't sugarcoat it. If there's some issues or something weirds with it, I'm going to let you know. Obviously, that's not the case for everyone that you meet on the internet when it comes to sales and stuff like that. So, you know, lesson learned. Don't believe every description that you read on a marketplace setting, and don't build your PC without, I guess, testing components. I don't know. But yeah, that is the first PC, and probably the one that gave me the most trouble, which was this AMD build. But I am glad it's over. I am glad that I did end up getting, you know, like the 5700X to run inside of this system, because that does mean it'll run Windows 11. Anyways, there will be one more video about the other PC that I built. That one's fairly different. It is much more budget oriented, and I will be posting that as soon as I can. And until I see you in the next video, which will more than likely be that PC build video, I hope you guys take it easy. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.